All right, in this reading, we're going to be looking at what is life, and we have three key questions that we are going to be answering in this first reading. So, first one is what are the characteristics of all living things? Where do living things come from? And what do living things need to survive? Okay. All right, so what are the characteristics of all living things? If you were asked to name some living things or organisms, you might name yourself, a pet, and some insects or plants. You would probably not mention a moss growing in a shady spot, the mildew on bathroom tiles, or the slime molds that ooze across lawns. But all these things are organisms that share several important characteristics with all other living things. So here it is. These are the characteristics of all living things. And just like in our last unit, when you had to know the characteristic of a substance to be a mineral, you have to know these things here. So here they are. All living things have a cellular organization, or made of cells, contain similar chemicals, use energy, respond to their surroundings, grow and develop, and reproduce. All right, so look at A, B, and C here, and D. What do you think? Are these things living or not living? And I'll give you a quick answer here. A is actually alive. B is alive. C is alive. It's a pretzel mold. D is not alive. Okay, moving on here. Cellular organization. So now we're going to break all of these down and talk about them individually. Cellular organization. All organisms are made of small building blocks called cells. A cell, like the one shown here, is the basic unit of structure and function in an organism. Organisms can be composed of only one cell or many cells. Single-celled organisms like bacteria are unicellular organisms. The single cell is responsible for carrying out all the functions necessary to stay alive. Organisms that are composed of many cells are multicellular. For example, you are made of trillions of cells. In many multicellular organisms, the cells are specialized to do certain tasks. Specialized cells in your body, such as muscles and nerve cells, work together to keep you alive. Nerve cells carry messages to your muscle cells, making your body move. The chemicals of life. The cells of living things are made of chemicals. The most abundant chemical in cells is water. Other chemicals called carbohydrates are a cell's main energy source. Two other chemicals, proteins and lipids, are the building materials of cells, much as wood and bricks are the building materials of houses. Finally, nucleic acids are the genetic material of cells, the chemical instruction that cells need to carry out the functions of life. Energy use. Organisms get energy from taking in and breaking down materials. The combination of chemical reactions through which an organism builds up or breaks down materials is called metabolism. The cells of organisms use energy to do what living things must do, such as grow and repair injured parts. An organism's cells are always hard at work. For example, as you read these words, not only are your eye and brain cells busy, but most of your other cells are working too. Young sooty terns, these birds up here, like the ones shown above, need lots of energy to fly. These birds can fly 4 to 5 years without ever setting foot on land. It's amazing. Respond to their surroundings. If you've ever seen a plant in a sunny window, you may have observed that a plant's stems have bent so that the leaves face the sun. Like a plant bending towards the light, all organisms react to changes in their environment. A change in an organism's surroundings that cause the organism to react is called a stimulus. Stimuli include changes in light, sound, and other factors. An organism reacts to a stimulus with a response, an action or change in behavior. For example, has someone ever knocked over a glass of water by accident during dinner, causing you to jump? The sudden spilling of water was a stimulus that caused your startled response. Growth and development. All living things grow and develop. Growth is the process of becoming larger. Development is the process of change that occurs during an organism's life, producing a more complex organism. As they develop and grow, organisms use energy and make new cells. Reproduction. Another characteristic of organisms is the ability to reproduce or produce offspring that are similar to the parents. Organisms reproduce in different ways. Asexual reproduction involves only one parent and produces offspring that are identical to the parent. Sexual reproduction involves two parents and combines their genetic material to produce a new organism that differs from both parents. Mammals, birds, and most plants sexually reproduce. Penguins lay eggs and develop into young penguins that closely resemble their parents. Where do living things come from? Today, when people see weeds poking out of the cracks in sidewalks or find mice in their cabinets, as shown in Figure 3, they know that these organisms are a result of reproduction. Living things arise from other living things through reproduction. For hundreds of years ago, 400 years ago, however, people believed that life could appear with non-living material. For example, when people saw flies swarming around decayed meat, they concluded that the flies were produced by rotting meat. The mistaken idea that living things can arise from non-living sources is called spontaneous generation. It took hundreds of years of experiments to convince people that spontaneous generation did not occur. So now we're going to talk about some scientists that actually proved this. So the first one is Reedy. Reedy's experiment. In the 1600s, an Italian doctor named Francisco Reedy helped to disprove spontaneous generation. Reedy designed a controlled experiment to show that maggots, which develop into new flies, do not arise from decaying meat. In a controlled experiment, a scientist carries out a series of tests that are identical in every respect except for one factor. The one factor that a scientist changed in an experiment is called the manipulated variable. Sound familiar? We've talked about this before. The factor that changes as a result of changes to the manipulated variable is called the responding variable. Reedy's experiment is shown in Figure 4. So Francisco Reedy designed one of the first controlled experiments. Reedy showed that flies do not spontaneously arise from decaying meat. Here's how he did it. Step 1, Reedy placed meat in two identical jars. He left one jar uncovered. He covered the other jar with cloth that let in air. After a few days, Reedy saw maggots, young flies, on the decaying meat in the open jar. There were no maggots in the meat in the covered jar. Reedy reasoned that flies had laid eggs on the meat in the open jar. The eggs hatched into maggots. Because these flies could not lay eggs on the meat in the covered jar, there was no maggots there. Reedy concluded that decaying meat did not produce maggots. Pasteur's experiment. Even after Reedy's experiment, many people continue to believe in spontaneous generation. In the mid-1800s, Louis Pasteur, a French chemist, designed another experiment to test spontaneous generation. That experiment, shown in Figure 5, along with Reedy's work, finally disproved spontaneous generation. So here's how Pasteur did it. Step 1, experiment begins. Pasteur put clear broth into flasks with curved necks. The necks let in air but kept out bacteria. He boiled the broth in the flask to kill all bacteria present. Step 2. The boiled broth remained clear. Pasteur then left some of the flask as is. Pasteur broke the curved neck of the other flask. Bacteria from outside the air now entered these flasks. Step 3. A few days later, the broth in the unbroken flask remained clear. Pasteur concluded that bacteria could not arise from the broth. The broth in the broken flask became a cloudy, showing bacterial growth. The evidence confirmed that new bacteria arise only from existing bacteria. What do living things need to survive? Though it may seem surprising, flies, bacteria, and all other organisms have the same basic needs as you. All living things must satisfy their basic needs for food, water, living space, and stable internal conditions. Food. Recall that organisms need a source of energy to live. They use food as their energy source. Organisms differ in ways they obtain energy. Some organisms, such as plants, capture the sun's energy and use it to make food. Organisms that make their own food are called autotrophs. Auto means self, and troph means feeder. Autotrophs use the food they make to carry out their own life functions. Organisms that cannot make their own food are called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs obtain food by feeding on other organisms. Some heterotrophs eat autotrophs for food. Other heterotrophs consume heterotrophs that eat autotrophs. They use the energy in the autotrophs' bodies. Therefore, a heterotroph's energy source is also the sun, but in an indirect way. Animals, mushrooms, and slime molds are examples of heterotrophs. So we are heterotrophs. We cannot make our own food. We have to obtain our food. All right, water. All living things need water to survive. In fact, most organisms can live only a few days without water. Organisms need water to obtain chemicals from their surroundings, break down food, grow, move substances within their bodies, and reproduce. One property of water that is vital to living things is the ability to dissolve more chemicals than any other substance on Earth. In fact, water makes up 90% of the liquid part of your body. The food that your cells need dissolves in blood and is transported to all parts of your body. Waste from cells dissolved in blood and is carried away. Your body cells also provide a watery environment for chemicals to dissolve. Living space. All organisms need a space or a place to live, a place to get food and a water and find shelter. If an organism lives in freezing Arctic or the scorching desert, its surroundings must provide what it needs to survive. Because there is a limited amount of space on Earth, some organisms must compete for space. Trees in the forest, for example, compete with other trees for sunlight above ground. Below ground, their roots compete for water and minerals. Okay. Stable internal conditions. Organisms must be able to keep the conditions inside their bodies stable, even when conditions in their surroundings change significantly. For example, your body temperature stays steady despite changes in the air temperature. The maintenance of your stable internal conditions is called homeostasis. Homeostasis keeps internal conditions just right for cells to function. Think about your needs for water after a hard workout. When your water levels in your body decrease, chemicals in your body send signals to your brain which cause you to feel thirsty. Other organisms have different mechanics or mechanisms for maintaining homeostasis. Consider barnacles, which as an adult are attached to rocks at the edge of the ocean. At high tide, they are covered by water, but at low tide, the watery surroundings disappear and the barnacles are exposed to hours of sun and wind. Without a way to keep water in their cells, they would die. Fortunately, a barnacle can close up its hard outer plates, trapping some water inside. In this way, a barnacle can keep its body moist until the next high tide. Refer to Figure 8 to see another example of how an organism maintains homeostasis. So we'll look up here. Homeostasis. During the winter months, birds rely on their feathers to maintain homeostasis. By fluffing its feather, the bluebird is able to trap body heat to keep warm. All right, I'm going to really quickly talk just a little bit more about homeostasis, and then we'll end this reading. Homeostasis really, this drives a lot of things in science. Let me give you an example. Nature and everything on Earth really, everything likes to be perfectly balanced. If you look at the weather patterns here on Earth, What drives our weather patterns is this constant battle between high and low pressure. It's always trying to equal itself out, but it just can't. That's why we have the winds that drive and steer our current weather patterns. It's this constant battle of trying to keep everything just right, this equal balance. But the weather can never, ever, ever achieve it. And that's what drives our weather patterns. The second something is out of whack in your body, you know it. Okay? The second a virus invades your body reacts with an autoimmune system response, meaning you start to feel bad. Your temperature starts to rise. And the second your temperature starts to go up, your body knows it's out of whack. It knows something's not right. And it sends signals to the other parts of your body that says, hey, something isn't right. Something is wrong here. Okay, well, that's the end of today's reading. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.